Alright guys, so let's look at our strips and let's go back and remember what the PQRS and T really means, and you know, what's it doing, what's the heart doing. So the PQ interval right here, this is basically the atrium of the heart squeezing, okay? And then the QRS is the ventricle of a heart squeezing, and then the T is the ventricles relaxing. Okay, so next we've got atrial flutter or A flutter. It's got a very defined look to it, like no P waves. You'll see like there's no distinctive waves. All you can really see are the QRS waves. There's no P wave. I don't even see a T wave. So it really just looks like a jagged saw. No P waves anywhere to be found. No T waves. All I see is a QRS wave. I mean, they're pretty consistent, but that's what you'll be seeing whenever you're looking at a strip. Okay, so next we've got atrial fibrillation, or otherwise known as AFib. I'm sure we've heard it a lot, especially like on TV and stuff, but it can be pretty scary. With AFib, some things you'll notice, the rate can be as high as from 350 to 600 beats a minute. It's pretty crazy. And the P waves are pretty much non-existent. Again, like all you see are the QRS waves right here. You see my pen? The QRS wave, and then basically your atrium and your ventricles are just trying to keep up, and it's just squeeze. There's no relax at all. So it's just squeeze, and it's just overworking. And like I said, there's no P wave, there's no T wave, there's no consistency. You got the QRS right here, and then boom, another QRS, and then you know, pump, and then another QRS. So there's really no consistency, and it can be pretty scary. Now, if it falls, all right. So next up, we're going to talk about our AV blocks. So this is our first degree AV block. The only big difference when looking at a lead and noticing the first degree AV block is the PR interval. As you'll notice, there's the P wave, but the interval is so prolonged. Everything else is relatively normal, your QRS wave and your T wave, but the interval is prolonged. So okay guys, so next we have second AV block, type 1. So some things to look for when you're looking at a strip like this. It's going to be irregular. You're going to have extra P waves, and the PR intervals are going to be longer, and the QRS waves are going to be dropped. So as you'll see here, so there's a P wave, but see how that interval is so much longer, and then the QRS is just so small. And then there's your T wave, P wave, and that look at that interval is just crazy. And there you go, small QRS, and so on. All right, so our next block we're going to be talking about is the second degree AV block, type 2. So you'll notice that the QRS is normal, but it can also be wide. And then of course, note that the PR interval right here is pretty normal. Okay, so next we have the third degree AV block, or a complete heart block. So what you'll notice on an EKG, or some characteristics that you'll notice on EKG, is that the atrial rate is usually within 60 to 100 beats a minute, and the ventricle rate depends on where the block is located. So the P wave has a normal shape. Typically, the PR interval can vary, and then the QR complex is typically normal. Characteristics of this strip really depends on where the block is located. So just keep that in mind. But this is a typical 3rd-degree AV block. Okay guys, so now we're talking about our ventricular tachycardia, and there's two types. There's the monomorphic and then the polymorphic. So the monomorphic is located at the top here, and then the polymorphic is at the bottom. There really is no P wave. You can see the QRS, and that's about it. You don't see a PR interval, you don't see a T wave. It's pretty much non-existent. It's pretty much lost into the QRS complex. So, and it's pretty jagged. Alright, so next up we have ventricular fibrillation, or VFib. So it's pretty chaotic. There's no R wave, there's no P waves, there's no PI intervals, or PR intervals, excuse me, and the QRS waves, it's almost non-consistent. It's very fibrillous, given the name VFib. So that's what you'll be looking at when you see VFib on EKG machine. So the heart rate is really not measured. You can't measure it with this strip. The rhythm's irregular, like I said, and it's really chaotic. So that is pretty much what you'll see with VFib. So lastly, we have asystole. Nobody really wants to see this on a strip, but you might come in contact with it, so be familiar with it. Asystole is really, honestly, easy to recognize because it's pretty much a straight line. There is no pulse, there is no P wave, there is no QRS wave, there is no T wave. This is basically demonstrating there is no heartbeat. So that is not a good sign, but this is what asystole looks like.